When writing SQL, either in Java code or in Python, in your application, the question is how to structure your application. So it's true there are layers like the logical layer, which calls the DAO layers, which actually calls the repository in your SQL. But the question is whether to use an ORM, an object relational mapping library, or just to use plain SQL. And if you use just a plain SQL, the question is how to structure the SQL, how to get SQL, how to make the call. Do you make a call to a string that contains the SQL? Do you store all the strings of the SQL inside your application, inside your code, in the resources folder, in files? If you store the SQLs in files, would it be in a single file, in multiple files? And why not use ORM? So in this episode, we are going to look at a library named aiosql, which is a Python library. However, in addition for it to being a Python library, I think we can learn from it the way that they think we should use SQL in applications, specifically in Python code. Basically, the case is this. They say, and I tend to agree with them, that ORM, object relational mapping libraries, are very good, but the thing is this, that you start using them when your application is starting up, so you choose an ORM, but then as the application gets more complex, then things start getting nasty, because you see SQL can be complex. It's a language. So either you lose the power of SQL as a language and just use ORM for standard CRUD operations, or you say, I need to work with a relational database, so I need the proper language, the SQL. And I tend to agree with the latter opinion. Even though ORM will give you caching and maybe transactions above and all these on top layers, I think that SQL databases are really good at these things, and we should use the right language for the right task. And the right language is SQL for relational databases. So why do we need another library, aiosql? Basically, it's a mini library that gives us the structure. So if you thought, how would I structure my SQL inside my application? So you would need to think, I need to store it in files, then I need to load the files, maybe in the files I need to do some kind of templating, because maybe the username is a parameter that I need to give the file, and all this thought. So aiosql is very opinionated about this. It's saying this. First, in order to install aiosql, you do pip install, let's say, aiosql, and then you can start using it. For example, you can create a file. This is from their documentation. You can create a file, greetings.sql. So we see first that we have created a file.sql where we place our SQL. In this file, you have the standard SQL. Let's say it's select user ID, username, name from users, where username is username. So they have the notion of comments. So in the comments, you can say comments in SQL is -- and then name, get all greetings. So what they did is that they are utilizing the SQL file and really a little bit of comments. This is not too drastic to make everything look nasty. A little bit of comments to give this SQL a name. And once you gave this SQL a name, you can load this SQL file. And when you call your SQL file with aiosql, you call a method name. This is really nice, I think. A method name which you have given this SQL file. So you load the SQL file, and just in the header of the SQL file, you give it a name, and then you just call this method, just like calling methods in Python or any other language. And also, you can specify parameters to this SQL. For example, you can say that you get a parameter, username, and then when you call this SQL file, you can also pass it a SQL parameter. And from here, you can already guess where we get to. We get to passing multiple parameters. We get to definition of loading multiple files. We get to being able to call the SQLs with the standard function names in Python. If you see the code, it's just, you see it's there, you just like call a standard function name. And then basically this is the basics, and from here you just continue to defining more and more complex SQL queries where you can pass arrays. You can define SQL and say that it's returning only one value. You can select the value. If you have multiple select statements, you can insert, update, and everything is looking very simple in this notation. So I think this is a really great library, because if you want to incorporate SQL in your Python code, this gives you the framework. Just create SQL files, give them names, call these files as names, get back the variables. No need to transform result set into variables. Specifying the SQL file whether it's going to return a single parameter or multiple one. Give the SQL files parameters. I frankly think that if anyone likes SQL, then this convention of using SQL, not necessarily with this library, basically calling SQL from a Python code, then this is really nice direction of giving names to SQL, passing parameters, and not using ORM, because ORM is really nice, but you tie yourself then to the ORM. Basically, you lose all the capabilities of the SQL. And if you work with relational databases, then you do want SQL. You don't want this layer. You can create layers by yourself inside your application. So this was a very brief episode. If you have a Python application that uses relational database, though I didn't use this library, it looks like a really nice library for using SQL. I would definitely try it for a personal project or even larger project and check what are the reviews, how many people use it. If I see that huge amount of users are using it, then I could also consider using it in production. So this was a brief session about how to use SQL in applications. Why do I think that in most cases SQL is better than ORMs in applications? Why do the aiosql agrees with me that this should be the direction? And how nice of this library to provide us with the basic capabilities of using SQL in standard applications. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.